Hey guys, welcome back. We will begin our presentation right at 1 o'clock. All right, everyone, welcome back. Good afternoon, and welcome back to day 2 of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality Environmental Stewardship Initiatives ISO 14001 Overview webinar. I'm Davy Connors, Environmental Program Consultant with the Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service. As we mentioned yesterday, over the next several days, you will hear from Don Burke, who is an ESI coach and environmental program consultant, Marcia Alaco, who is our section chief of the environmental assistance section, and Tim Havens, ESI intern in his second summer with the program. Also assisting us today with the program is two more of our interns, Emma Mullins and Shrusti Patel. We want to thank our partners, Land of Sky Council and the Waste Reduction Partners, a 20-year-old pollution prevention program that provides customer on-site technical assistance. Thank you guys again. Okay. Go over a few housekeeping reminders before we begin. If you have audio issues and are using the audio through your computer, you can switch to your telephone. Just go to the audio tab in the webinar control box and click phone. A phone number and code will appear, or you can use the information that is on the webinar invite email as well. We are recording today's session and we'll send a link to the recording and copies of the slides to all registered attendees. So if you can't make it to a session or would you like to hear anything again, you will have access to it. We also already have a recorded version from earlier in the event section of our website. I'll get to that in just a moment. At various points in the training, we will refer to exercises or other documents. You can see those in the handout section of the toolbar. If you are having trouble with those, I know some people were yesterday. We also have on our website, for those of you who weren't able to access them yesterday, we have them at this link here. You can go and find the exercises from the last event. They should be the same as this event. Obviously, the webinar recordings and the slides are going to be different, but that is a little workaround for you guys who are having difficulty getting those handouts or Tuesday. Once we have completed the webinar, the recordings and slides will also be available on this same web page under the past events. We're going to see if we can pop this this link into the chat for you guys so that you can access those. Okay, so everyone has come in muted to prevent feedback, but this is a interactive webinar, as you guys saw on Tuesday. And we want you guys to be involved, ask questions. So if you have any questions or if you want to be involved in the activities, please type your questions in the question box or raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, we'll send you a unmute request. Okay, so this is the agenda for today. We'll do the welcome, which is what we're doing right now. Then we're going to talk about risks and opportunities, which is clause 6.1.1. And then we'll talk about aspects and life cycle perspective, then compliance obligations and planning activities or actions, and then objectives and SMART goals. And then we'll have a little chime for Q&A. But like I said, this is interactive, so feel free to raise your hand or type in a question at any time and interrupt us. So feel free. On Tuesday, we talked about the framework pieces of the ISO standard, which are the organizational context, the interested parties, the EMS scope, the EMS policy, and then leadership and responsibilities. So just to jog your memory, the organizational context, these are your internal and external issues that the organization could affect or be affected by, including any kind of environmental issues. Interested parties are those internal interested parties like your employees, your contractors, your corporate management, and then also external interested parties. Those could be your neighbors, your regulators, and your customers, for example. So, and then as part of the standard, you have to identify, are the needs and expectations of those interested parties compliance obligations? Does the organization decide that they are compliance obligations? Within the EMS scope, this is the boundaries of the EMS. So it can be both physical, but also organizational boundaries of the EMS. And then you have the EMS policy. In the EMS policy, you have to commit to 3 things: to protect the environment, including pollution prevention, to fulfill the compliance obligations, and to continually improve the EMS. And then leadership, responsibility, and commitment. If you remember, there were 9 areas in which top management must display leadership and commitment. And that authority can be delegated, but ultimately top management retains that responsibility. So before we move on to today's stuff, does anyone have any questions about Tuesday's material?
I don't see any questions yet, Davey.
Okay, if you have any questions, like I said, just pop them into the question box or raise your hand, and we will get to your questions. Okay, well, let's start talking about planning. Today is all going to be about planning. We're going to look at section 6.1, which is planning to address risks and opportunities. We're also going to look at 6.2, which is environmental objectives and planning to achieve them. Okay, so the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain the processes needed to achieve the desired outcomes and the requirements of this standard. So, okay, that means that you need to have processes in place in order for your EMS to be successful. It's pretty pretty understandable and cut and dry. When planning the EMS, the organization shall consider the context determined in 4.1. So remember that I said that the standard builds on top of itself. This is one of those ways. You're looking back at 4.1, which was your context, and when you're talking about doing your planning. You also have to consider your compliance obligations defined in 4.2. Those are those needs and expectations that the organization decides are going to be compliance obligations. You also have to consider your scope of the EMS. What are the boundaries of the EMS? And then when planning the EMS, the organization shall determine risks and opportunities related to the environmental aspects defined in 6.1.2. And so we're going to get to that today, environmental aspects. Compliance obligations defined in 6.1.3. Also, we're going to get to that. And then other issues and relevant requirements in 4.1 and 4.2 that need to be addressed to give assurance that the EMS can achieve its intended outcomes, prevent or reduce undesirable effects, and achieve continual improvement. So this idea of risks and opportunities is new to the 2015 standard and is quite a bit broader than anything else like aspects and impacts. So the standard defines a risk and opportunity as a potential adverse effect, which is going to be the threats, the risks, and the potential beneficial effects, which are going to be your opportunities. Like I said, it sounds like at first glance that you're talking about your aspects and impacts, but it is much broader and it's used across the board. So let's look at some of these examples from the annex. So it says, this is from the annex. It says the organization can also have risks and opportunities related to other issues, including environmental conditions or needs and expectations of interested parties, which can affect the organization's ability to achieve its intended outcomes for the environmental management system. For example, an environmental spillage due to literacy or language barriers among workers who cannot understand local work procedures. So when we were talking yesterday about internal and external issues, an internal issue might be a language barrier. Why would a language barrier be important when you're talking about your EMS? Well, because if someone can't read the work instructions or doesn't understand them, then you can have an environmental impact from that. So the next example is increased flooding due to climate change that could affect the organization's premise. So that's a external issue when you're defining your context, or an environmental issue that when you're defining your context that could actually affect the organization and therefore could affect its environmental outcomes. Lack of available resources to maintain an effective environmental management system due to economic constraints. Introducing new technology financed by governmental grants, which could improve air quality. And water scarcity during periods of drought that could affect the organization's ability to operate its emission control equipment. So these are some internal and external factors that have associated risks with them, but they also have associated opportunities with them. So it's not just about the negative, it's also about the positive. So not every risk and opportunity is required to be included in your EMS. There must be a connection to your environmental management system. So an example is hazardous waste disposal. That's an obvious connection to your EMS, but credit card fraud is not. I mean, you might be able to tie it back to your EMS if it financially impacts your ability to um, eh, have an EMS, but probably not. So this is not a formal risk assessment. Um, it is just looking at those risks um, and opportunities, but it does need to be documented. Okay, so an example here is a compliance violation. The risk is legal actions, fines, marred reputation. But you also have an opportunity when it comes to compliance to go beyond compliance, and that would improve your reputation. It would get you positive press maybe, or could be a marketing benefit. This is intended to be subjective. It is based on the opinions and interpretations and judgments of the organization. It does not have to be an objective determination. It doesn't have to be based on numbers and calculations and spreadsheets. Oftentimes when you hear like risk, you think of a risk assessment. This does not have to be that. It can be if that your organization chooses, but in no way, shape, or form is intended to be that way. The determination of which risks and opportunities will be addressed in the EMS is the organization's decision. It is not required to be based on what any particular interested party or management system auditor thinks the decision should be. Okay. You have to have processes established to ensure that the risks and opportunities are identified, or that are identified are addressed, so the organization can give assurance that the EMS can achieve its intended outcomes, excuse me, and prevent or reduce the effect of, excuse me, of your environmental aspects. Okay, so here's an example of an aspect list that also includes a place for you to put the risks and opportunities. So this is from the North Carolina Zoo. And you can see there's other things involved here too. There's aspects, there's life cycle stages, there's impacts, and there's risks and opportunities here. Any kind of control measures that are taken, and your comment section here. So this is one way where you can show that you are addressing your risks and opportunities. Another way that we have from another one of our members is this pestle, and I showed this yesterday, Tuesday, when we were talking about something, I can't remember, but I showed it because it had a different, it was context, right? So they had this political, economic, social, technology, legal, and ecological column here. So they could say like which of these is being affected, but then they also have this column for risk and opportunity, where they can list not only the negatives, but also the potential positives that could come from any aspect and impact. Okay. So let's continue to read the standard. It says that the organization shall determine potential emergency situations, including those that can have an environmental impact, which is 8.2. The organization shall document or maintain documented information on risks and opportunities that need to be addressed. So not all of your risks and opportunities, just the ones that you determine as an organization that need to be addressed. And the process is needed in 6.1.1 and 6.1.4 for you to have confidence that they are carried out as planned. So we said before that sometimes the standard can be a little repetitive. This first statement here in this general is, it is a bit repetitive because there's an entire clause of the section that's devoted to emergency situations, and we'll talk about that on Thursday of next week, we'll talk about that. But yeah, and then the other part is just saying that you have to have documented information. Okay, Marcia, you're up next.
All righty. Let me take that from you, Davey.
And while she's doing that, does anyone have any questions?
We're not seeing any at this time.
Excellent.
All right. Well, if you have any questions that come to mind, feel free to share those, and we will get Davey to answer them. All right. I'm just making things smaller on my screen so that I can see everything I need to see. Okay, there we go. All right, so we're gonna transition now into environmental aspects, which is section 612. And so this has historically been in the standard from the very beginning, but it's been changed a little with the 2015 version. And as I read this, I'll point that out. So what the standard says is within the defined scope of your environmental management system, which we went over and you set that up on Tuesday. That's one of the first things you do when you establish your EMS. The organization shall determine the environmental aspects of its activities, products, and services that it can control and those it can influence, and their associated impacts considering a life cycle perspective. So it's that last phrase, considering a life cycles perspective, that's been added. So let's just take a step back. The standard defines an environmental aspect as an element of an organization's activities, products, or services that interacts or can interact with the environment. So when we teach this to folks, we like to say an aspect is the cause of something. If you're trying to look at your processes and trying to figure out what's the aspect, what's the impact, usually the aspect is the cause. And then the environmental impact is the change to the environment. And that can be either adverse or it could be beneficial depending on what an organization is doing. And it could be either wholly or partially result from the organization's environmental aspect. So that change to the environment, we consider impacts to be the effect that an aspect has on the environment. So hopefully that's making sense to those of you who haven't had any exposure to the EMS standard. And really the aspects are the fundamental building blocks of your EMS. It's really the key ways you identify that you're interacting with the environment. And as you go through all the different sections of an EMS, you're putting processes in place to control them, to make sure you're monitoring them. We're going to learn a little bit. Some are going to be considered significant, or those that could have a greater impact on the environment. So they're pretty significant to your EMS. And as I mentioned, they can be adverse or they can be beneficial. You know, if you are an industry and you've got wastewater, you know, that's probably maybe untreated. Whereas if you're a water and a wastewater treatment facility, that wastewater is actually a benefit, right? After you go through and you clean it up and it's ready to get discharged back in the environment, it should be a heck of a lot cleaner and better than the you know, untreated wastewater. Okay, so the other piece of this, the last part of that sentence, it says to identify your aspects and impacts considering a life cycle perspective. So if you remember back from Tuesday, I was going over those definitions and there were some words that had special meaning. So if you remember back, consider means that it is necessary to think about the topic, but it can be excluded. So you should look to identify your aspects and impacts via the life cycle as an additional tool to ensure you've included everything. And perhaps, as we've all learned over the last 2 years, life cycle is, that's where your supply chain lies. It's one of the steps in the life cycle. So that can be turned on its head depending on where those come from. And if you have an EMS, maybe that's something you look at, or you've probably already looked at, has that affected how your EMS functions or how you're going to manage your environmental aspects and impacts? By no means does this require you to do a formal life cycle analysis. It just wants you to be thinking about that. And it's another way where the standard is adding in that sustainability portion to itself when they revise it. Okay. All right, so we're just going to go through a real quick exercise. And if you guys, you can either just do this in your head, or if you have a piece of paper and you want to jot something down. So I've got 10 different instances on the screen.
Hey, Marcia.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I've got a quick question.
Oh, sure.
Juan Rodriguez was curious, or had a comment. So environmental aspects have to be monitored and measured?
I don't think so. I am not the expert on monitoring and measurement. So we're going to be going over that later. They may need to be. I'm just not sure how the significance piece of that aspect goes into monitoring measurement. And the reason I say that is I think we mentioned on Monday, one of our long-term trainers left us. So we've picked up different pieces, and that was within the last few weeks. So as we transition into that, but Juan, I will write that down and I will look at that. After my portion of the presentation is done, I will pop up the electronic version of the standard that I have and look at monitoring and measurement, unless Davey or Don, you know the answer already.
Well, I do know in covering monitoring and measurements that it can be subjective, and that is something that you can choose to do or not. So that is a
Okay, that's
decision
what I
that you
thought,
are.
but I wasn't
Yes.
wholly sure.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Don.
Mhm.
All right. So back to our aspect exercise. So just look at the examples on the screen and think about that whole, an aspect is a cause, an impact is an effect, and try and jot down whether you think each one is an aspect or an impact, or you think it might be both. And we'll give you guys about 5 minutes to think through those. So that'll be about 1:31. And then we'll go through them together. Alrighty? Okay. And feel free if you need a break or something to use this time for that well. All right, so we'll be back in just about 5 minutes. All right, so we're getting almost to that 131 mark, but I did want to note that Davey provided some more clarity regarding that question that Juan just had. And it's in the question box, but I'll read it out just so everyone's clear. So it says, if the organization decides to set an environmental objective, or what we're commonly known as a goal, around one of the significant aspects, then that objective must be measurable and monitored. But as Don noted, the standard doesn't require monitoring and measurement of all your aspects and impacts. It is subjective. So,
And this is Don
hopefully,
again.
yep.
It does exactly. I agree with what y'all said, and the standard reinforces that the organization should take into account its significant environmental aspects, compliance obligations, operational controls. So it's something you should factor in, but it still remains subjective.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Don and Davey. All right. So let's go through these examples, and if you guys will type into the question box what you thought for each one, whether it's an aspect or an impact. So the first one is bioaccumulation of toxic substances in flora. What did you guys think that was, an aspect or an impact? All right, so we've got two responses and they're opposite of each other. We have one that, okay, we've got tilting towards the impact side of the house. Anybody else want to chime in?
We have a couple of people who have raised their hand.
Oh, okay. You guys want
Let's
to
see
go
here.
through the hand raising?
Let me send Bianca a unmute request. Let's see here. Nope, that did
Davey,
not.
have they raised their hands or just sent in a reply?
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't watching the hand raising. I was looking at the questions, but I was not looking at names. You're right. They just sent in the questions. So the majority of folks identify bioaccumulation of toxic substances as an impact, and I would agree, right? So there may be a release of a chemical, but that effect that it has on the environment is that it bioaccumulates in fauna. So I agree that it's an impact. Okay, the next one, oil or antifreeze in employee vehicles. You guys think that's an aspect or an impact? All right, so everybody is solidly in the aspect category, and I agree with that. As long as it's in there where it's designed to be, it could be a cause of an environmental impact, but it doesn't have to be. So definitely an aspect. Great job. Okay, depletion of non-renewable resources. Okay, so I see. Yep, everyone is saying impact. I agree. Right, so something is happening that's causing that depletion of non-renewable resources, and the depletion is the effect it has on the environment. Conservation of wildlife habitat. All right, so we're a little split on that one between aspect and impact. And I will have to admit, I used the answers that we had, and so we have impact. So I think it almost could be both, right? So just in general, conservation of wildlife habitat, that could have a good impact on wildlife, but it could cause other things. So maybe Don or Davey, do you have any thoughts? We had impact in our answers. So I think that's one of those that could, depending like my wastewater one, it could potentially be both.
I agree.
All right. Depletion of landfill space. You guys thinking aspect or impact? And I'm looking at my other screen, so you have to see the side of my head. I'm sorry. All right, everybody is solidly an impact. I agree. You're doing something, you're creating more waste, and maybe that's what's depleting the landfill space. So definitely an impact. All right, let's see. Electrical usage. All right, you guys are getting good at this. All A's. Oh, wait, we had an impact. So almost everybody had an aspect. So, right, we're using up electrical use. All right, so we had someone that said an impact and someone who said both. All right, so let's talk through this one. Electrical use. It's something that you're doing, but what does that do on the environment? Does it have any change inherent in itself? Probably not. So that's why I was going to say aspect. The impact, what is the impact from electrical use, right? That could be a reduction in non-renewable resources, or it could be reduction in renewable, depending on what, how your electricity is generated. So I think I'm landing on the aspect side of this one. Does somebody want to defend the impact for electrical use? Let me switch my attendee. Solomon, your hand is raised.
Yeah. Hi, everybody.
What are your thoughts, Solomon?
Yeah, I would say both because, the source of energy for electrical usage, that's one thing. So, of course, there will be emission or something which will be generated while generating that electric source. So, I would say that will have impact to the environment. And, of course, the aspect is there.
Right. I agree with you that there is going to be an impact, but maybe that specific impact, that's a different phrase from the electrical use, right? So you use up your electricity, and what is that going to cause? It could be that you use you lose your electrical, and that could cause an environmental something to happen. Or like we said, the depletion of resources, that would be the impact.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Right, because we have the cause and effect. So I think electrical usage is solidly in the cause part, and then there's going to be a separate impact or effect that's going to come from that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we had somebody note that there could be global warming or resource depletion. Right, both of those could happen from electrical usage. And so the global warming would be the impact, whereas the electrical use is the cause or the aspect. The same thing with resource depletion. All right. Let's move on to the next one. Improved air quality. What are you guys thinking about that one? Okay. Okay, so we're split on this one too. So improved air quality, is that the cause of something, or is that the effect of doing something? I think it's the effect, right? You've done something that has caused there to be improved air quality. So I would say that improved air quality is the impact, and whatever the cause of that is the aspect. Right, and Bianca just noted that a reduction in emissions, which would be the aspect, caused the improved air quality. That could be one example of how those two things are interacting with each other. So in our little score sheet, we had improved air quality as an impact. Okay. And you know, as we're talking through it today, and if you're setting up an EMS in your organization, these are the types of discussions that you need to have. And you think about these situations in a holistic view, right? Because it could be you talk about something and you realize that it has many different ways it could affect something, and you sort of work through what the cause is. So these are really good discussions. Okay, what about product packaging? Okay, so we had almost everybody say it was an aspect, which is what I had it as, but we had someone that noted it as an impact. So product packaging in and of itself, I think, is an aspect, right? Because you can change and design it differently so that its impact on the environment is different. So you could have product packaging that doesn't have any recycled content. You design it differently, and it does either has more recycled content or it's made with something else. Because the impact from the product packaging is probably going to be, it's going to end up as a waste if it's not something that can be recycled or reused, and it's going to end up as waste, and the impact is going to be depletion of landfill space, right? So the product packaging of itself is an aspect. It's going to cause something else to occur. Okay, wastewater. What are you guys thinking about that? Okay, so I'm seeing aspects and impacts. And I had someone that noted both. Back to my example, I think it could be dependent on the situation. So let's say you have wastewater that's untreated. If you spill it, that could cause an environmental harm. So in that one, it's an aspect. But if you're at a wastewater treatment plant and your final product is treated wastewater, you know, a little different, little adjective in front of that one. The discharge of that is going to be good. So I could see where we could look at it in both ways, and it just depends on where it is in your process and what it's going to happen. But from our scorecard, we had it as an aspect. So, but I agree with the discussion that depending on where it is, it might change. Okay, and the last one, vehicle emissions. Okay, I'm seeing lots of aspects come in, and that's what I had, right? So vehicle emissions are going to have an impact on the environment, and just depending on what they are, that impact could be good or bad. You know, if there's, as we've increased the efficiency of our vehicle emissions have been cleaned up, especially right after we got rid of leaded gasoline. So the vehicle emission is the cause, and then there could be an impact on the environment. Remember, they can be beneficial. So if we're using cleaner fuels, that impact is going to be less than if we used some different type of emission. All right. So hopefully that little exercise helped you all to have a better understanding of aspects and impact. And we'll have some more examples here in a minute. Okay. So the second part of that slide that we just went over, you're going to look and try and identify your aspects, but the standard now asks you to consider, to think about that life cycle perspective. And for those of you, hopefully everyone's familiar with the life cycle. And these are pretty much typical stages within it, right? So you design something, then you acquire the raw materials to make that product. You have the production phase where you make it. Once you have your finished product, or even in the production, or all along the life cycle, there's going to be transportation and delivery pieces. The end user of your product is going to use it. And then once its life is up, you're going to have potentially maybe some end of life treatment, and then final disposal. Okay.
Marsha, we have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Don.
Bianca asked, did you say that one, might be a little out of order. Did she say that one was impact? Bianca,
the last example.
okay, for the
the
last example. Yes.
So in our scorecard, we had the last example as an aspect.
Okay.
Let me just go back to that real quick. Let's see. Vehicle emissions. Yeah, that's an aspect. Okay. So I'm just going to talk through the different phases and things that, you know, they may not all apply at your facility. Maybe you're providing a service where not all of these parts of the life cycle are going to apply, or maybe you're making just one part that goes into a larger product. But just things to think about. We had a really savvy ESI member that worked at a water and wastewater, and when she was coming through the class, she had an epiphany that for the transportation piece, well, they do that. It's the pipes that they use to move the water or their potable water, you know, from where they first get it through to where they treat it, and then off to the, you know, their customer. So some of these things may apply for you. It's just that you need to think about it a little differently. So when you're designing a product, there's a couple of different things you can think about, because design is one of the most important things, because it can affect those different pieces of the life cycle later on. So in design, you have control over what raw materials are needed, and you can make the decision whether what chemicals you're going to use, and whether maybe you could reduce the hazardness of the materials that go into a product. You could increase the recycled content, or you can make it from something that is a renewable resource. Your design is also going to affect the manufacturing process. So if you design it to be an additive process like 3D printing versus a subtractive process like, you know, stamping or something like that, you know, that can affect how much raw material is going to be used. So you want to design it so that you remove the minimum if it's a subtractive process. And then how you decide to manufacture it could affect how much energy is going to be needed to make that product. Your design is also going to affect the end of life treatment, right? So have you included materials that can be easily separated at the end? Or can it be reused, either whole or in part? And can the product be recycled or composted at the end? Those are all things that could be designed into something. And you'll have to bear with me. I'm on that back end of the cold where you don't want to get into a coughing fit. So the raw material acquisition considerations. Are there less toxic materials that could be substituted when you're sourcing your materials? How do you receive those materials in, right? We've had quite a few members that have changed up the volume of the material they bring in. Rather than bringing in lots of small packages and you have all of that waste associated with it, you buy it in bigger bulk containers. We have one member that they switched to bigger, I don't know if they're 300 or 5-gallon totes, and then they just ran hoses via a vacuum and they go into a wholly separate room. So there's a lot less packaging if you bring things in bulk. Is that packaging on the raw materials returnable or released to recyclable? And so we have a couple organizations that have multiple locations in the site in our program. So when they're shipping things back and forth between each other, they use returnable dunnage. So it's not, wood pallets are something that can be exhausted. It's this reusable material until they've used it so many times that at some point it's going to be obsolete. But that's really a great thing to do when you're transporting. When you're getting a raw material, does it have a higher energy demand than a substitute or a higher water demand? So those are things that can be changed. And then if you choose to use one material over another, is that going to affect maybe pre-treatment if it's something that's, you know, a water-based process? And then if you use a certain chemical or a certain material, can it be filtered or treated out or reused? All right. And then we move into production when you're making the widgets, right? So what are they made of and what materials are they used? If you're just in the production, you know, can you source them from somewhere else? Or do you have any say? Or is that set by a customer or a different part of your company that you may not have a say? Or, you know, is that a question you can pose to your sister site? You know, hey, have you guys ever thought about making it differently or doing something different? When you're making something, you have to think about the waste and the discharges that are generated. You may have contractors or vendors on site that help in your production. So we have one of our ESI members where they have a contractor that does the painting of their materials, and they do it right within their facility, but everyone knows that that process is actually done by contractors. So it's something that they need to control when they're developing their EMS. Another thing to think about is what do you do offsite? We had an ESI member. They owned their trucking materials, but sometimes they would send them offsite to get serviced. So they needed to think about that and what their vendor was doing. Or sometimes the vendor would come on their site and do the servicing. And then your traditional, what permits or regulations do you have around what you're doing? What fuels or energy sources are being used? Is it a process that is water intensive? Can that be changed? And then, the type and volume of wastewater that is produced. So those are all the things to think about in production. Transportation and delivery. So that applies, all throughout the life cycle, as I said before, those products, the raw materials, and the waste that may be generated. There's going to be your associated air emissions, greenhouse gas, something that everyone is starting to look at about reporting and figuring out, what parts are yours and what parts are coming from your supply chain. There may be hazardous material spills that come through transportation and delivery, traffic accidents. There could be leaks of materials such as oils or hydraulics. There may be some damage to the finished product due to shifting, or perhaps it was incorrectly packaged and there was some corrosion because the incorrect materials were used. And then your general, as you're moving it around your facility or loading it onto those trucks, the fork trucks or power lifts, it can cause emissions, but they can also damage products from not doing it quite right. Okay, once it's a product and the end user gets it, there's the use considerations. The biggest one I complain about, I still own my Subaru, and I still love her, but I remember back when they were having discussions about changing the miles per gallon requirements on cars, and Subaru was very vocal in that they wanted their cars to be considered a truck so that the gas mileage was not as high, that they wouldn't have to meet. And I was like, all right, listen, you're all about the environment, supposedly, Subaru. And this is just my personal opinion. I'm, not knocking it or anything, but I was like, okay, you're sort of going against that other part that you're saying there. So That was definitely something that they had control over in their design and in how the end user used the car. Just wanted to throw in my own personal example on that one. Okay, end of life treatment and disposal. So do you have any control of how the product is treated once it becomes obsolete? Can you change the design? Change that percentage of recycling, recycled material, or can you make it easier to recycle it once it becomes obsolete? Some folks have a take-back program. I know that's more prevalent in Europe, and that might be some of the discussions that you're going to start seeing. You know, there have been some in the US, but we're at a point, I think, with climate change and the impacts from you know, landfills and other things that maybe we start having those discussions here. What does the product break down to? Is it compostable, recyclable, or does it have reusable pieces? And then the take back program is part of that product stewardship piece of the puzzle. Okay. So hopefully you guys, if everyone's thought about life cycle, but we went through all of those, and you're going to consider that when you identify your aspects, right? You don't consider means you gotta think about it, but you don't have to. But hopefully, maybe those are some ideas for objectives to set as part of your EMS, ways in which you can continually improve your process. And so the aspects are the fundamental building blocks of your EMS, remember. So the next part of the standards spells out that when you're determining your aspects, the organization shall take into account change, and whether that's planned or new development, new or modified activities, products, or services, abnormal conditions, and reasonably foreseeable emergency situations. So we've got that other term in here, take into account. So this one is you have to do this. These are things that you have to do. So one of the ways that we've seen our ESI members put this in place is they put a management of change process in. So if they're gonna do, let's say, expand their footprint, or they're gonna change, they're gonna add new production lines, they have to go through a specific process. There's specific questions that are asked about that. There may be a meeting that has to happen where the environmental folks meet with the project managers, and they go through exactly what is planned to happen. And the EHS staff goes through and they identify whether that's going to change any of their aspects or any other part of their EMS, so that you're managing that change, especially those planned ones. And then the other one is they want you to look at abnormal conditions, right? So that's something that's not going to happen all the time, but maybe, let's say you have a boiler on your site and you've got startup and shutdown, and it doesn't start up like it's supposed to one day. And so that's causing increased emissions. You know, you should have a plan in place for that, because that's reasonably foreseeable. That may be considered an emergency situation. Back when I was in one of our regional offices with the department, we had a poultry facility, and it was the packaging part of it where they did the packaging, and they had a freezer area, and the freezer was made cold by nitrogen and ammonia. And so what happened was that there was a leak in that system. Somehow there was a leak of water, and that affected the refrigeration system. And so the ammonia got into the water, and it was on their roof, and that increased ammonia concentrated water went out on their roof, down through their stormwater system and to a creek, and it resulted in some fish. And I remember that the Region 4 incident commander, that was a big enough release that they ended up on site, and there was lots of questions to that facility about, did you think about that these two things could happen, that there was a water leak and there was a failure of your freezer components, so that the two would mix and there was then an environmental impact from that? So those are some of the things that we like to think about. We go through one of our ESI members, you know, we go to our sites, we like to do site visits. And so we were going through their site, and we came out one side of the building and there was a railroad track. And maybe the railroad track was like, I don't know, 15 feet away from the building, or may have even be closer. And we're like, have you ever thought about if a train derails, what you would do? What are you storing on that side of the property? And could, you know, and we went inside and they had some chemical, like flammable cabinets on those walls. And we're like, well, can you move those to other places so that, you know, God forbid, trains don't derail all that often, but it is a foreseeable emergency situation. Is it more prudent for you to store those materials on a different side of the building, because that is an emergency situation? That same site, we went around back and they had some transformers from their electrical, and we're like, well, do you own those, or does, you know, your energy provider own them? And do you know, have they ever had PCBs in them? Because they look that they are pretty old. So that was something else. If you've got transformers on site, you know, are they yours? If they're not yours, do you know whether they've ever had PCBs or some other material? Are they non-oil? Or just to think about those different situations that you should be able to plan ahead and foresee what environmental impacts could come from them. And you decide whether that's, as we go through next, whether it's a significant aspect and something that you're going to try and control or include. All right. So hopefully everyone has access to the handouts. I just wanted to let you know that there's that little screenshot on the left we included, and this is courtesy of EPA. It's kind of old. I think it's circa 2005 era, maybe. It's an example of a life cycle, and it's for a CD or a DVD, which aren't as common as they used to. And it's for a younger audience, but it's a really great example, taking you through those different stages of a life cycle. And then it gives you some exercise just to think about it. So we wanted to share that with you as a more common product, maybe not as much as it used to, but takes you through the life cycle and all the different things to think about. And then we just wanted to have you guys do another life cycle example. So you can either think about a process or something that happens within your organization, or if you want to think back to our friends low mountain mining that you were exposed to on Tuesday, and I know we have a couple new people. That is a surface mine for limestone. And so we just went through all the different ways that operation could affect the environment, and what are the internal and external processes to think about that. But you could think about low mountain mining. And the idea here is to identify at least one aspect, whether that's from your organization or from low mountain mining, and go through that next part of this worksheet. Go through the life cycle and identify, and the way this sheet is set up, you mark those columns with a C if it's something that you can control, an NC for it's not something that you can control, or NA, it's not really applicable to that aspect. So it is 2:04. I'm gonna give you guys 10 minutes. You've been with us for an hour, so you might need a little break to get up to stretch. So if everyone will just have at least one aspect, and when we come back, let's say 2:15, we'll have you guys raise your hands and share with the class some of the aspects that you identified and what you noted for considering the life cycle analysis part of this. All right. So we'll take about a 10-minute break and we'll see you back here at 10:15. 2:15. I did want to ask, was there anyone that had issues with accessing the handouts today? If so, we can make sure you get those. We'll send you an email during this break. So if you had issues with accessing the handouts, please raise your hand. Okay, great. I don't see anybody's hand raising. Awesome. Okay, so it's almost 2:15.
And Marcia, we had a question.
Yep. Oh, okay.
This is from Jean. Once on the website, how to access Tuesday's recorded webinar. It's not up there yet, but it's currently being edited by the GoToWebinar platform that we utilize. So give us a little more time on that, and it will be placed on under this training.
Yeah, and as Davey said, we do have some prior versions of the training that are on the website. So ones that we did last year. Can't remember whether we did this once or twice. So if you wanted to review the first session of one of those, it should be pretty similar. You'll just hear different voices as to who gave what presentation. And as Don said, Tuesday's version is still getting edited. All right.
And that'll be under ESI and then prior events. And then it'll be under EMS events.
All right. Thank you, Tim, for that description of where it's going to be. Okay. So I was wondering if there was someone in the audience that would be willing to share what they came up for their aspect and what they identified as the different life cycle stages that might affect that aspect. So if someone's willing to share, if you'd raise your hand, please. Uh-oh. We have a bunch of shy people. Michael Malloy. All right. Michael, I think you're unmuted. So if you want to chat with us. I'm seeing you as unmuted on our side. Michael, are you there? I don't know if you have to unmute. Oh, now you're in. Okay, I see you muted on our side. Let's see. Oh, no.
Looks like you might have just posted a question.
Oh, okay.
He said he's not sure what's going on. Let him check his settings.
Oh, okay.
And he is
Can
showing
you hear me
green.
now?
Yes,
Oh,
we can.
There we go. Okay, perfect. Sorry
The
about that.
gremlins.
Yes, they get in there and they change all the settings. Well, first off, good afternoon. So what I identified is the agency I work for doesn't really produce like a traditional product, but we do have laboratory waste.
Mm-hmm.
So IDing that as something we can track through the different stages. Design, not really applicable to, we don't design waste products, right? But the acquisition of raw materials through the lens of the processes that generate that waste product, we do have control over that. Obviously, it's production similar to the acquisition of raw materials. We can control what we're doing there. Transportation delivery, we actually do have control over. Use, not really applicable. It's a waste product. It can't be turned into something useful, at least not economically or technologically at this time. End of life treatment, we do actually maintain control of that. We're a hazardous waste disposal facility as well, so we do have control over the processes that we use to dispose of that waste product. And obviously final disposal, since we are the disposer as well. We can, although we do ship it off after it's been processed, if it's not completely handled on site for long-term storage, but we do get to choose our own vendors. And so we can, do audits of the vendors and make sure that they're doing the things that they're saying they're doing, and that they're saying that they're going to do environmentally sustainable things. So we have a fair bit of control over that process.
Excellent job. Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Michael. Did anyone else want to also share what they had for their aspect and how they looked at that through the life cycle perspective? All right. So it's not looking like we have another person to share, but we'll go through one later on where we've filled it out for one of our members. We'll go through that. Okay. So hopefully through these couple of exercises, you've got a good handle on what an aspect is, what an impact is, and how to look at that through that life cycle perspective. Okay. So once you've identified those, the standard says that you shall determine which of your aspects can have a significant environmental impact, and you have to do that using established criteria. So established criteria is new in the 2015 standard, and what that is like a scoring matrix or putting a value on certain different things, or having a way to determine yes or no, this particular thing is going to be significant or not. And the reason they added that is because there was some subjectivity being used before in organizations determining their significant aspects. So we knew of one organization where a group of folks, their EMS team was getting together, and they would all just have a discussion, and at the end of discussion, they decided what was significant. So that process is not really reproducible. It could be, outcome could be different depending on who comes together at that meeting. So the adding in that established criteria helps to make, put some confidence in that when you decide what's significant, that this, if your staff changes and you get different people in, if they're using the same process, you should get to the same answer of what is significant and what's not significant aspects. And we'll go through some examples of criteria in a moment. And then once you have decided what is significant, your organization is required to communicate its significant aspects among the various levels and functions of the organization as appropriate. So one of the ways that that's done is, especially if you've identified, let's say, Michael, at your facility, you've decided that your lab waste is a significant aspect. So anybody that works with that lab waste needs to know that that's something that you think is really important, and that they know the different ways that the organization is controlling it. Maybe you may be monitoring it, and what are their roles in that process to make sure it comes out as it's planned. So that's why you need to communicate what your significant aspects are within your organization. And then the last piece is that the standard says your organization shall maintain documented information of what your environmental aspects and impacts are, what that criteria is that you've set up to determine which of those aspects are going to be significant, and then what your final, maybe it's a list you produce, of what the significant environmental aspects are for your organization. And just for clarification, the standard defines a significant environmental aspect as one that has or can have one or more significant environmental impacts. Okay, it's kind of intuitive. All right, so here's some examples of maybe the ways, the criteria that an organization uses to define something as significant. So they have divided it between categories, and then they've ranked them. So they've got the scale of an impact, like if something happens, is it something that's going to affect just the local area? Could it affect a regional area, or could it affect a national area? And so they've given different values based on those. The severity of the impact. So for a high severity, they've decided that, you know, that's if something is potentially life-threatening or life-altering, it's going to be significant. A low severity of impact is there's little danger to the health of humans, flora, or fauna. And the way you go through this using the criteria is sometimes folks may decide that they're, they go through their criteria, they get their number, and they're just going to add those numbers up and get a total, and then try and see if there's a natural break point. Or you may decide that you have a few criteria and then you multiply it by a specific criteria, right? So maybe the likelihood of occurrence, that may be one that you multiply some of the other ones by, so that you can get that separation where you see a difference in your aspects and their values and what is going to be significant. And hopefully this will get a little clearer as we go through these examples. So this is, I haven't looked at this in a long time. So this was an older version of the criteria that the NC Zoo used. They're one of our members, and because they're a public agency, we feel a little more comfortable saying where this came from. So they use severity, frequency, and then quantity as their criteria. And they've broken that down between low, medium, and high in their values. So for frequency, they broke that down into, is it something that occurs less than monthly, monthly to weekly, or weekly to daily, right? So if it's something that's happening all the time, there's a higher likelihood that maybe something could happen to that one. Okay. And then we've got this one, which changes it up. Some of these are value-based, right? Frequency from 0 to 5. But then we have regulated, and we know quite a few of our members, if it's regulated or not. Some of them decide that if it's regulated, it's always going to be significant. And so there's a little bit of bias in that, or maybe use it a little differently. If you come up with your values and you say, everything that has scored 25 points and over that is regulated, then that's significant. But it's really up to the organization how you use these criteria, what you select, how you choose to do that calculation to get your values. And then there may be another discussion on the back end of looking at them and making a manual breaking point for what is going to end up to be significant versus non-significant aspects. All right, so this is an example of one that's been filled out already. And this came from the zoo, and I'm just moving stuff off of one screen to another so I can see the detail better because I'm looking at it on my bigger screen. They use the form that we have. These forms are ones that we have in our design guidance manual. So if you're an an ESI member, you have access to our design guidance, so that this is it's a workbook, an Excel workbook that helps you develop an EMS if you don't have one in place. And so we also have example forms, and our members and other folks we're willing to share these forms with you. So if you see something during our training that you like, we'd be more than happy to share that with you. So this is the zoos, and it's not a up-to-date version. So part of their aspects, they have their operations, their guest transportation, spill response, and maintenance. They sort of put a couple things together. And so the aspect is that they're going to either use fuel or they're going to use some other sort of natural resource. That's their aspect. And so they've gone through, looked at their life cycle. So they said that they could control the design and the acquisition of those raw materials. They had no control, or it wasn't applicable to the production, right? They just bought that as a commodity. They had no control over the transport or the delivery, right? So that's someone else delivering those materials to their site. They did have control of how that was used while it was on site. They did not have any control over the end of life treatment or the final disposition if those materials were used properly. They identified that the impact, Don, did I hear you? Do you have a question?
Yes, Juan is buzzed in. He believes that they are a member. Can he have a copy of that? So
Juan, did you, we have the EPA RTP, but we would be happy. Do you want to have a copy of this aspect document? Is that what you're asking for? Yes, okay. Most certainly, we will get that to you, sir. Okay. So back to the zoo, their use of fuel and natural resources. So what they've identified as the impact is that they could have, that could result in some soil or surface water contamination. And that also is going to result in some depletion of non-renewable resources. So for their significance, they're using severity, frequency, quantity. They've got an impact rank in here. And then they're also throwing in whether they've managed it, right? So is there management control of this aspect? And they answer yes or no. And then they go through a qualifying or quantifying how effective is their management of that. So that gives them another number. Has it been identified as a compliance obligation? So they answer yes or no for that, and they come up with a number, and then they determine whether it's significant or not. And then they also go further. If it's significant, they put they determine whether something's a priority in their setting their goals. You know, maybe they end up with 5 significant aspects, but they all decide that, you know, there's one that we really want to work on. We want to set a goal to improve in one way or another. So that's what that significant priority is. And remember, you can make this process where that criteria as complicated or as simple as you want, as long as it's a process that no matter who's using the process, you can reproduce the results. And then as Davey mentioned this earlier today, they've got the little, we sort of put all these pieces on the same form. So I think that's why it's easier to use. We have a space to identify risks and opportunities. So for the zoo in this fuel and natural resource use, they said that operator efficiency, so how they drive maybe have an effect on this aspect. And then where their equipment is in its life cycle, right? So if they have older equipment, the risk for spills or something like that may be higher. If there's higher mileage, there may be, if it misses preventative maintenance, or just from failure of parts, that could have a higher risk. Excuse me. So they added that in. And then they identify the different ways that they control that. So the zoo has a lot of different SOPs. So I think that's what those numbers refer to, all the different SOPs that are helping with controlling that aspect. All righty. And I think this is the last slide in my section. Okay, why is little, they move things around, and now my little arrow isn't going, yep. All right, Don, I think it's your turn to take over for compliance obligations.
yes, it is. I'm redocking my panels, presented to you today by GoToWebinar. So let's see.
Which we have to thank Waste Reduction Partners. They're
That's
the ones
right.
that own this platform, but they
And
allow us to use it. So
I'm going to take the screen from you.
okay.
And full mode. Are y'all able to see this? Whoops. Let's see.
Yep, Donna, we're seeing it in full mode as far as I can tell.
Okay. Let me There, move this little plane down here. All right, compliance obligations, everyone. 613, it's something that's dear to my heart. Over the last few decades, I've been inspected, I've been the inspector, I've been audited, I've been the auditee or auditor, and I've been the contractor who's been stuck in the middle between a governed entity and that facility. So I'm well aware of the joy in compliance obligations. But one thing you can take to heart, it's a learning opportunity. It really is, and nobody can convince me otherwise. The good letters, the bad letters, good reports, bad reports, it's all a learning opportunity. So with that, let's jump into it. The 2015 standard states that the organization shall determine and have access to the compliance obligations related to its environmental aspects. As you've heard today, the organization shall determine how these compliance obligations apply to your organization. Nothing cookie cut about that, right? It's specific. The organization shall take these compliance obligations into account when establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving the EMS. And finally, the organization shall maintain documented information of its compliance obligations. So only two minor things have changed with this clause from the 2004 standard to the 2015. The standard no longer requires a procedure for identifying compliance obligations. It's still a good idea though, all right, but it is no longer required as per the actual standard. Now, in the standard, it's noted that in addition to the documented information required in specific clauses, an organization may choose to create additional documented information for purposes of transparency, accountability, continuity, consistency, training, or just ease in auditing. Again, you may choose, it's not a requirement. Now, this is one of those cases where for the purpose of consistency, it might be beneficial to keep a procedure in place in your EMS for identifying your compliance obligations. May make your life a bit easier. And additionally, the standard no longer refers to legal and other, and instead calls them all compliance obligations. A nice segue to the next slide. If I can, there we go. So compliance obligations include legal environmental requirements that an organization has to comply with, and other environmental requirements to which an organization chooses to comply. Now, compliance obligations can arise from applicable laws and regulation or voluntary commitments stemming from the needs of interested parties. Now, a reminder, interested party is defined as a person or organization that can be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by a decision or activity. Now, some voluntary compliance obligations include contractual relationships, codes of practice and agreements, even expectations of your third parties. Voluntary undertakings become compliance obligations once an organization's to adopt them. However, until they are written out of your EMS. So they're not set in stone from here on out. That is up to you. Now remember, the organization must determine the risks and opportunities associated with your compliance obligations when doing so. So legal compliance obligations, okay? They may encompass a broad range of topics and can originate from many regulatory agencies, federal, state, local, international. Some of these examples you see here, I won't read them all, but Clean Air Amendment Act, the Clean Water Act, how about the Hazardous Materials Transportation Act or Toxics Release Inventory Reform, National Historic Preservation Act, depending on where you're located. The National Environmental Policy Act, SEPA, that's a state environmental policy act. Your spill prevention control and countermeasures plan, if you have one, are required. Hey, some other examples are permit requirements. How about those limits and reporting requirements? Executive off orders, the Atomic Energy Act, even Energy Policy Act. There are local restrictions that you need to pay attention to. Your pre-treatment permits, grading permits, and so on. Superfund or other cleanup agreements must come into consideration. How about an operator or laboratory certification requirement, especially if you have a NPDES permit on site? Now, some additional legal requirements include your transformers, such as your polychlorinated biphenyl or your Toxic Substance Control Act of '76. Nursing stations and hospitals, have you considered those? At medical waste, if it's biological waste, your solid waste division may take care of that. If it's hazard, then of course your hazardous waste section. And many times those nursing stations, I've inspected many of them, right around the corner, they have a compactor for the bio solid waste. How about your grounds irrigation? Are there any local water restrictions? Pesticide applications? Your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning? Okay, do you have certified technicians for refrigerant recovery? Fluorescent lights, that mercury universal waste realm in there. A lot of people go into LEDs, and back when I was presenting for Haz Waste, and they're still doing this now, they'll touch base on your LEDs. Right now, they're looking good as far as how to manage them and dispose of them. However, in 10 years from now, or RCRA rules, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, will those change in years to come on how you have to manage your LEDs? That's something to stay on top of. Again, nothing coming over the hill. It's just one of those things you have to keep in mind. Computer monitors, my, e-waste, electronics. That is more and more of a problem. Audit your vendors who take that off your hands. Make sure that e-waste is going to where it's supposed to go. It's not ending up in some field out in a rural area being disassembled for the precious metals, or it's not ending up in a storage locker 4 states away. Because guess what? You're still liable for that if you do not maintain your manifest or your bill of ladings. Make sure you've taken care of your part of the deal. Okay, and audit those vendors. You are allowed to visit them and check out their facility. I mean, and their processes. All right, you don't want that to go woefully wrong and be contacted by state authorities or even federal authorities to say, you need to come out here and help clean this up. And by the way, you may be subpoenaed. It does happen, and it is happening. So make sure that e-waste is going to the right place. Again, keep those bill of ladings, keep those manifests, not just for 3 years or 7 years, keep them forever. Cardboard. Are there any local landfill bans you must adhere to? Okay, other state landfill ban materials, wooden pallets, plastic bottles, and so on. Right. So another thing about your vendors, great group of people. It's a process that's needed. It's an entity that's needed, but just make sure they're doing their job properly. Are they telling you the proper way to manage and to transport, have your waste transported off the property? There was one example in Haz Waste or Universal Waste, which is under that umbrella, on the transportation of used lamps, fluorescent lighting. They're supposed to be enclosed in a box. It's taped, secured, et cetera. It's completely closed, labeled, dated. You have a year or less to get it off your property, right? Well, one vendor told the facility, you don't need to put those in a box. We're not worried about that. We got you covered. Spectre comes along, guess what? That vendor just wrote you an NOV, notice of violation. Okay, so if you're not sure if you're getting the right information on how to manage your waste streams, contact your regional inspector. Have a talk with them. I'm not going to get you in trouble. You're just trying to go above and beyond and fulfill those rules and regs that are put in front of you. Okay, that vendor may be thinking they're going to giving you a break, making your job easier, sure, but in the long term, you may be paying the consequences. Other compliance obligations, as you see here, your 14,001 commitments, How about if you're not part of ESI or any other voluntary programs in your area, business programs, corporate mandates from above? How about your customer requirements? You know, what do they want of you? And are you meeting that so you're keeping them as a customer? You know, some may want you to join a version of ESI or get certified, your ISO 14001 certification in place if they want to do business with you. How about your supplier requirements, industry standards? Good grief, contractual agreements. All right, it goes on and on. Remember, in the ISO 14001 2015, this defines compliance obligations as legal requirements that an organization has to comply with, and other requirements that an organization has to or chooses to comply with. So some of these are indeed voluntary. Some of these may come from corporate and not state or federal government. Just keep that in mind. So keeping current with these changing regulations, changing rules. I've walked into the sites and they may not have been visited for a couple of years, and they may have new staff in place on their environmental program. They're like, how do I keep up with this stuff? Well, it's simple for us here in North Carolina with DEQ. Go to that regulatory division's website. Many of the new rules and regs are indeed posted. Go to EPA.gov. Contact your in North Carolina, Region 4 out of Atlanta. This is easy to do. You're not raising a red flag by trying to keep up with these changing regulations, okay? You're trying to go above and beyond and do the right thing. So you have a lot of options here. You can subscribe to an update service or get updates from industrial trade groups. You can attend trainings. NCMA here in North Carolina, Energy Environmental Health and Safety Conference, our organization, NCDEQ. How about EPA webinars? Now, there's private ones out there. I mentioned hazardous waste. Well, NCMA has one on the North Carolina level, but also McCoy's webinar. I'll promote them. They're an excellent company. I've attended those sessions. Beautiful. If you've heard of TED Talks, it's very similar. Check your regulatory websites. Okay, for example, EPA's Echo Notify, for example. Again, EPA.gov. Just Google in anything extra you want to put in there, it'll take you right to it. A regulatory listserv. We actually maintain a listserv for our members. You can contact in North Carolina a DEECS Environmental Assistance Coordinator. All right, we have 7 regional offices. Currently, we have 5 coordinators, but we're on the verge of having 7, 1 for each office. All right, contact them. You don't have to be a member of ESI to do that. Hire a consultant if the money's there. I know budgets can be tough, but something to consider. Another option that people have done is North Carolina State University's Industry Expansion Solutions. All right, if you have a corporate legal team, put them to work. Yeah, let's look into this. You could create a tracking or reminder center, a system, you know, for like a compliance calendar, task reminders. A lot more people using Microsoft Teams. That has a function for that as well. Now, keep in mind everything I've just said. This is not a requirement of the standard. Not a requirement, but don't you think it's necessary for compliance evaluation? And it is implied. Okay. So again, as mentioned earlier, an organization should have a process in place to anticipate and prepare for new or change requirements. This happens all the time. This so that appropriate action can be taken to maintain your compliance. You should also consider how applicable legal requirements and other requirements to which the organization subscribes might apply to or affect new or modified activities or products or services, okay? Oh, let me go back one more to this slide. One example I had in my past with water quality, and I saw this a lot with wastewater treatment plants. The operator, I'd show up with a field copy, but also always an extra copy of their permit. You know why? Because while the municipality or the private company may have gotten the new permit, it never trickled down to the most important people, the operator in charge, the operators on staff. So they were unaware of those changes. And if it did get to them, guess what? They would just swap it out with the one on the wall that they're required to hang, but they wouldn't read through it. What can go wrong with that? Usually violations started generating in our BIMS database that we utilize with that. And usually you'll see sampling frequencies. Those changed, but you're not going to know that until you actually read through that permit and compare the new with the old. So frequency, sampling frequencies and other associated parameters, they can hit you on the backside of the head if you're not careful. So make sure, an example, if you have something equivalent to that, in this case, it's wastewater treatment plant, your operator's in place, and that new permit that's issued, make sure you read through that. Make sure those inspection reports are read. Even the ones that show you in full compliance, they're still chock full of good information for you to learn from. All right. Some inspectors like I did, I love to write good stuff in there and good tidbits in there that can help you go above and beyond and continue with that continual improvement. Continual improvement can be associated with anything. It doesn't have to be just your EMS, be anything you do in life. I think you will agree with that. Now, here we have a scenario. We could talk about this together, okay? I'll give you a little background, okay? You'll see the questions here. We'll go over in a minute. But this quarry, it only blasts during the daytime when most residents are not home, all right? They have voluntarily taken this on, and it has become one of their compliance obligations. Now, it's voluntary. Can they change that in the future? Sure. If they ever want to go 24/7, that's up to them. All right, but right now, it's during the day, it's voluntary. Good for them. They're being a good neighbor, all right? So with this, with just that little background, let's go through the questions. Who might be interested parties for this rock quarry? You can raise your hand. You can put it in the questions box. Y'all just let me know if anything comes through.
Not saying anything yet.
Nothing. Well, I'll get it going. I'll get it going.
All right.
How about your adjacent subdivisions and businesses? Yeah.
One member of the audience said, how about the homeowners?
Exactly. Subdivisions there. You can see that on the map. Back to the right on the map, there, nothing but subdivisions. Looks like to the south and to the northwest, and I assume to the west, businesses. Okay, great.
Another member said neighbors, which is similar.
Yep, that's right. That's a lot of times, especially with activities. This mine might have been here 25 years before that subdivision. Okay, it's called encroachment. All right, so but they're still going to do their best, or they should, to be a good neighbor and to keep that in mind, because that's just called progress. Or the mine just might have appeared. It may have been undeveloped land, and they had the permit for years. They're finally using it. So what can they do to appease the surrounding subdivisions, businesses, etc.? So one thing about that is infrastructures like roads, right? There's a large phosphate mine in the eastern part of the state, not far from where I live, 45 minutes or so, but they've been around for decades, and they have a permit to operate for another few decades. And what they've kept in mind, really rural area, so they don't have a huge impact on subdivisions like this, but the roads nearby, they are impacted because some of those roads end up in the pathway of the open mining. What do? No problem, they relocate the roads. They foot the bill. That's wonderful, okay?
And
that
Don,
roads, go ahead.
we have two more answers. We have
Okay.
local and state government agencies and county stormwater regulators.
Exactly. Yes, indeed. I've also was thinking about water and air, impacts on that. How about noise from the quarry? Yeah. Tuesday, we talking about dust suppression. Maybe not as much as you would think from an open mine like this, but the service roads for sure. The heavy equipment going in and out. Yeah. Okay. The second one, what might be their needs and expectations? Anybody have anything on that?
Nothing yet.
Okay.
They might like when you get the ball rolling.
Well, I'm sure they would love feedback. What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? How about the permitting process?
And again, I'll mention if anybody wants us to unmute them, you can raise your hand and we will send you an unmute request, if that would be easier than typing in.
And while you're thinking about that one, we could also look at what compliance obligations might the quarry voluntarily take on as a result of the needs and expectations of these interested parties. We've already stated one. They decided to blast only during the daytime. Now, that may change in the future, supply and demand, right? But for now, that's a voluntary action that they've taken. Being a good neighbor, going above and beyond these obligations.
Michael, I am trying to unmute you, but it says that you are self-muted.
Yep.
And Don, Juan Rodriguez said air permit.
Yes, definitely.
And Michael, you have the floor.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Audio being all weird today. Traffic concerns
Yes, sir.
from both the businesses and the homeowners in terms of, one, increased vehicles on the road, and two, those vehicles are likely to be heavy industrial vehicles, and so I'd be worried about wear and tear on the roads and damaged infrastructure.
Definitely. And if you look at that map close enough, especially Westgate, that road just north, or I perceive as north on the map, looks like, that, and there's one other to the right. Can't really make it out, but you got two primary roads there that businesses and the subdivisions utilized a lot. And of course, the quarry has no choice but to utilize them. So yes, indeed. Yep. How about communication? That's going to factor into all this. Transparency. If there are any complaints or issues, can this company needs to really take hold of transparency and let everyone know this situation, this is what we're trying. This is, maybe hold some public forums, to get in the feedback from the public, but also to show what their company is capable of. Okay, good deal. And again, these situations are indeed in a state of flux, any situation like this. So again, it's about continual improvement. What can you do to maintain that? And I've seen some areas, especially wastewater treatment plants, and both NPDS and non-discharge wastewater systems where there's spray fields, et cetera. And they didn't have a care in the world because it was a rural area. Nobody lived there for 30, 40, 50 years. All of a sudden, new developments popped up, and then guess what happened? Complaints, newspaper articles, etc. And that's really you had to put in odor scrubbers and this and that. And some things worked, some things didn't. And that's where the public also has to give a little give and take, wouldn't you think, with that encroachment.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why a business like this always has to be looking ahead at advances and new technologies and improvements to prepare for things of that nature.
We have
Well,
another comment from Michael Malloy that
Okay.
says they could also survey the local area for feedback.
Definitely. It's all about communication, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, indeed. I'm curious looking at this map, who owns that plot of land north, of Westgate Road there? It's undeveloped. Is that the mining operation? One of the scenarios I know in real life, yeah, they own a strip of land, probably another mile ahead of them, which is going to eventually be mined. Or in this case, is that owned privately by a developer who's going to put another subdivision in there?
Yeah,
Or
and in this case, it's actually owned by the mine, and they routed a road around the outside of it so that they could start mining that area recently.
Excellent. Yeah. So
good question.
all right. So How do you track compliance obligations? Well, one example is a simple log like this, okay? You know, we'll look at it real quick here. This is pretty generic, but it may serve your purpose. Again, nothing's cookie cut. You can make it as elaborate or as simple as you'd like, as long as you can track this. And make sure when something like this is in place, who in your facility is monitoring this? Okay, don't forget that. Don't just set it up and then maybe somebody leaves. Make sure something like this is constantly maintained. So don't forget that. So here we got compliance obligation title. In this case, they have a stormwater permit, okay? What's the regulatory agency or the driver? In this case, North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality's Division of Energy, Mineral and Land Resources, DEMLR. They forgot their E in DEMLR, but that's okay, we know what it means. The citation and link, well, 40 CFR 122.26, great. Paper trail, there's a general description of the compliance obligation, talks about their stormwater outfall discharge, etc. What triggers this? Okay. So the permit is required if the facility is manufacturing a SIC, a standard industrial classification. It has a point source discharge, stores or processes materials outside. It's because it's exposed to stormwater. Your environmental aspects, your stormwater runoff, right? So then we have your summary of controls, SOPs, plans, permits. So in this case, a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, your NPDES, Industrial Stormwater Permit, an SOP of visual inspections. Who's going out there? What are they doing when they get out there? What frequencies? What are they looking for? An SOP on how to sample stormwater. You know, I've been sampled many times over the years, including by the EPA. Just how is my sampling? How can y'all have faith in a state inspector who can't sample properly? But I learned how to sample years before I joined the state, so no worries with that, folks. All right, your non-stormwater discharge certification, all right? Now, this one I used to come across all the time. A lot of heartburn. Where's the location of your guidance documents and resources? You know, many times, you know, the person wasn't there. They were off on a workshop compliance meeting trying to get, you know, improve and get better, but they're the only ones with the key to the filing cabinet. So don't let that happen. Or worse, nothing was locked up, but nobody was there who knew where it was. All right, so make sure you have backup in place. All right, and it can be spread out. There was one inspection where 4 structures were involved, and there might have been documents located in each one of them. It might have taken a little time to gather it all for this inspection. That's okay, as long as you can find them. Now, can you improve that process? Sure, you can. You know the old saying, especially in compliance activities or site visits, get them in as fast as you can so you can get them out as fast as you can, right? So make that process a little streamlined, all right? But it's mainly just to avoid any hiccups, to show how well organized you are and you have all the information that's going to be needed. Your monitoring requirements, as I said, if your permits change, pay attention to this, okay? This can and often does change, not to trip you up. No, they're just trying to make the process better with research and data that's collected year after year and decades. It's put to use. It may actually give you a break, but oftentimes things change, maybe on the federal level, so the state will match that, and you have frequency changes, okay? Things of that nature. So make sure you pay attention to those monitoring requirements. Date, due, and frequency of reporting. Again, this occurs. This can show up in your permit. All right. If you have a permit for air, water, wastewater, stormwater, mining, energy, etc., and you haven't looked at it for a while, look at it. Okay, look at it. Now in North Carolina, what if your permit suddenly so-called expires? That permit renewal is behind from getting a new one issued. What do? You just don't stop the world. No, you just keep utilizing that permit, okay? Get in touch with your permit writer as well. Maybe they'll give you an idea when to expect a new one. But until then, go status quo. You won't be punished for that. Documents and records are required to be maintained, okay? So make sure you have your ducks in a row with that. Keep qualitative monitoring records, your in this case, non-stormwater discharge certifications, your stormwater pollution prevention plan, copies of sampling results for sure, paper trails, okay? Calibration and maintenance records for 5 years in this case. Submit sampling results within 30 days. That probably came from a permit, yeah? Okay. Again, it's all about proper training, getting your staff to get familiar with this and make sure a checklist or a log like this is complete. And I've got one slide on planning action 614, okay? But I do have some comments, all right? So the organization shall plan to take actions to address the following: significant environmental aspects, you've heard that. Your compliance obligations, yep. How about your risk and opportunities identified in 611? I'll talk about that again here in a minute. And the organization shall plan how to integrate and implement these actions into your EMS or other business processes. How to evaluate effectiveness of these actions. Is it working? Do you need to tweak it? Again, it's about continual improvement. And the organization shall consider, when planning these actions, technological options, changes. How about your financial, operational, business requirements? All right. So the organization plans at the highest level you can the actions that have to be taken within the environmental management system to address your significant environmental aspects, your compliance obligations, your risks and opportunities identified in 611 that are a priority for the organization to achieve the intended outcomes of your environmental management system. All right. So this can include procurement, finance tracking, monitoring, regimes, methods. How about new operational controls, new emergency preparedness routines? Yeah. What's key in all of this is to establish, implement, and maintain, okay? Establish, implement, and maintain. And of course, to adjust and improve, continual improvement. All right. Thank you, everyone. If there's any questions, just feel free to let me know.
Okay, I'm not seeing any at this time, so
Okay.
let me take control. Show screen. Okay, are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes, indeed.
All right, excellent. All right, so we're going to move on to environmental objectives. And anytime you hear the word objectives, you can just think goals. It's the same thing. 621 says that the organization shall establish environmental objectives at relevant functions and levels, taking into account, I'm going to pause here, taking into account means that you have to think about and you cannot exclude. Remember, there's those two different words, take into account and consider. Consider is like, okay, I thought about it, but like, no big deal. I'm gonna just think about it, not do anything about it. Take into account, you have to think about it and you cannot exclude them. So when establishing your objectives, you have to take into account your significant environmental aspects, which is what Marcia was talking about earlier today, your associated compliance obligations, which is what Dawn was just talking about, and the risks and opportunities, which is what I was talking about at the very beginning of today. So you don't necessarily have to set objectives for every single one of your significant aspects. You can take a little chunk at a time, say you have one significant aspect, say you have 3, you can set a goal for one of them. Doesn't mean that you have to set a goal for all 3 of them, but you do need to take that into account when establishing your objectives. Same with your compliance obligations and your risk and opportunities. Okay, so your environmental objectives shall be consistent with your environmental policy. They shall be measurable if practicable. That does not mean practical. Practical means if it's reasonable to do so, whereas practicable means if you are capable of doing it, then you should do it. So they need to be measurable, they need to be monitored, they need to be communicated, and they need to be updated as appropriate. And the organization shall maintain documented information on its environmental objectives. Okay, so we're going to take a little deviation from the standard here to talk about how to set goals. We recommend that you set SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. The standard requires that your goals be specific and measurable. So you might as well do the rest because it's SMART. So let's see what we're talking about when we say SMART goals. Specific, when you're writing a goal, you want to be very specific in the terms of what do you want to achieve? Why do you want to achieve this? Where is this goal going to take place within your operations? How are you going to achieve it? And identify any requirements or restraints that might prevent you from achieving that goal. You want your goals to be measurable. Can you identify when you've reached your goal? Do you have concrete evidence that you have reached that goal? Do you have access to the parameters of measurement? Do you have a baseline that has been established? What units of measurement will you use? And will you normalize your data? Will you compare it to production or time or income, etc.? Oops, I went a little too far. And then continuing on with measurable, if you're looking for metrics, sometimes they can be difficult to locate. So if it's like something with human resources, they might have your training records if you have a training goal, for example. If you have a cost goal, you might have to go to purchasing to get those kinds of numbers. If you have a maintenance goal, then you might have to go to maintenance, your maintenance operations, to get those numbers. Compliance, if it's a compliance goal, then you might have to get that information from your compliance officer, etc. Okay, the next part of a SMART goal is A, attainable. Are your goals realistic yet challenging? Setting goals that are realistic and challenging can help strike a balance between aiming too high and making them too easy. Both a goal that's too high and a goal that's too easy can cause a lack of interest and involvement in the process with your employees. You want to have stretch goals that take time, cool, but it might be a good idea to break those goals down into individual pieces. If they seem too large, people won't want to commit to them, or it'll be harder for them to commit to them, whereas smaller steps can be celebrated with each accomplishment. So for example, maybe you have this lofty goal of being zero waste to landfill, and it might take you, 5 years to get there. What if you broke it down into smaller steps so that over time you get to your goal of zero waste, but you have these little celebrations in between. You've reached these milestones. Yay, everyone can be happy and excited about it. Okay, you also want your goals to be relevant. Do your goals match your company's philosophy, their mission statement, their policy? Is the goal fit for your corporate culture? Is it customer driven? Does it improve efficiency? Does it save you time? Does it save you money? Does it improve your relationships with your community? And then the final thing is time bound. The T stands for time bound. So you want to set deadlines. You want to make sure those are realistic, but also flexible, so that if you don't reach your timeline, you can shift it if need be. And do you have a way to follow up to see if you are reaching your goals? All right, so let's look at some SMART goals. There are different types of SMART goals. You can set a goal that is intended to investigate or study. So an example of an environmental objective that is an investigatory one is you are studying the feasibility of gray water use with a final report by second quarter of 2018. Okay, so is that goal SMART? It is a SMART goal. It is time bound. It is specific. So you're studying the feasibility of using that gray water. It is measurable in terms of maybe you're not measuring something specific quantitatively, but you do have a way to determine if that goal has been reached, because you are going to create a report by a date. So it is measurable in that way. It seems to be attainable and it seems to be relevant. Okay, another type of goal that you can set is a control or a maintenance goal. So this one, the objective is to maintain stormwater compliance with 0 violations by the end of the year. So again, it is a SMART goal. It is maintaining, but even those types of goals are still goals, and they still could be challenging. Just maintaining sometimes, say for example, if you already had a 0 waste goal and you want to maintain 0 waste, that's a lofty goal, even though you are maintaining. Okay, you can set a goal to develop an EMS. Your objective would be for that something like implement an EMS with a third-party audit by January 2019. Probably need to change these dates so that they're in the future. But yeah, so that would be an example of taking a goal like developing an EMS and making it SMART. Now you have it time-bound, it is specific, measurable, attainable, and relevant. Say you want to improve your EMS. The goal could be streamline contingency plan to make more user-friendly by the end of the year. Okay. Okay, and then obviously, I think this is the most obvious comes to mind to me anyway, when setting an environmental goal, is that it could be an environmental goal to improve your environmental performance. So here's an example of a SMART goal. We have reduce electricity use by 10% in fiscal year 2017-2018 from fiscal year 2015-2016, which was the baseline. Same thing, natural gas, reduce natural gas by 5% from the baseline. Okay. Okay, so another example for and improve your environmental performance is increase the volume recycled materials by 50% in the calendar year from your baseline. All right, now we have some other examples. I want you to tell me quickly in the question box, is it a SMART goal? The first one is replace all lighting in the warehouse by the end of 2017. Is that SMART? Okay, Sandra says no. Michael says no. Excellent. The answer is no. It's replace the lighting with what? Are you going to replace it with LEDs, with halogen? What are you going to replace it with? Excellent. Okay, second one, create facility level target to reduce energy consumption. Is that SMART? Again, I'm getting no's. Okay, yes, so this is an exploratory goal where your goal is to create or to determine a target. but there is no timeline. And to reduce energy consumption, how? What type of energy are you talking about? How are you going to reduce that? Are we talking electricity? Are we talking natural gas, etc.? Okay, decrease electricity from 3%, decrease electricity use 3% from 2012, actual per product produced. Is that smart? Okay, I'm seeing some yeses and some no's. It is smarter than some of the other ones, but it is not time bound. It gives you a baseline, which is excellent, but it doesn't say when we want to have that 3% done by. So in this case, it's smarter, but it's not quite smart. Increase recycling. Is that smart? No. I mean, it's a good goal, but it is not specific. How are you going to do it? It's not measurable. It's not time-bound. Excellent. I'm getting a lot of no's for that one. Good. Okay, we'll do one more. Let's see here. Let's go down to the second from the last. Receive third-party ISO 14001 2015 certification by 2018. Is that one smart? Excellent. I'm seeing yeses. Yes, that one is smart. You have a time frame. It is specific. It is measurable. You can see if you have achieved this goal or not. It is, hopefully it's attainable. I mean, it's not really attainable because it's in the past, but we're going to pretend that it's attainable. And it is relevant. So excellent job, guys. Okay, so going back to what the standard says about environmental planning to achieve environmental objectives, it says that when planning to achieve environmental objectives, the organization shall determine, one, what will be done, so that's that specific part, what resources will be required, who will be responsible, when will it be completed, and how the results will be evaluated. So that's part of your monitoring that Dawn is going to talk about, I think, on Tuesday. So what will be done, what resources will be needed, who will be responsible, and when will it be completed, and how will you evaluate your effectiveness? And the organization shall consider how actions to achieve objectives can be integrated into the business processes. Okay, here's an example form for planning actions to achieve objectives. This is from one of our members, Mecklenburg County Solid Waste. They are a municipal governmental agency, so we feel comfortable telling you who it is. But they created this form specifically because the requirements of the standard. It doesn't say that you have to document it in some kind of form, but it's a good idea. So in this case, the standard says, okay, what will be done? Well, they put that in their project title. What resources will be required? They put that in the resources needed for the project. Who will be responsible? It's clearly responsible parties. When will it be completed? Their project deadline. And then how will results be evaluated? And that's that piece where it says how will progress be monitored? And then they even have a place down at the end for the results of the project. So they keep this up to date with their goals so that they're able to report out, okay, these are the things that we need, and this is the results of the project. Okay, the standard also said something about integration into your business processes. It said the organization shall consider. Consider is that word that's a little looser. It's not as strong as take into account. It means you need to think about it. So the organization shall consider how actions to achieve objectives can be integrated into business processes. So some ways that you can integrate, you can think about the location. Is this an organization-wide objective, or does it only apply to a specific area or a unit or activity? If it's organization-wide, then that's more integrated into the business processes. It may depend on the location of your significant aspects and the actions and steps to be taken. And site-wide goals increase involvement and visibility, involvement by all of the employees, and obviously visibilities. Your employees are another part of the integration into the business processes. Involve them early. Are all of the employees involved, or is it just a very small group? Is there a way that you can get all of the employees involved? It's not always practical for all of your employees to be involved in all of the environmental objectives, but when possible, it's really helpful to have that involvement. You want to create a sense of ownership that helps that buy-in. And then you want to communicate not only what the goals are, but where you are on those goals and the expectations. So consider linking achievements of the environmental goals to business goals and reward programs. Okay, some other ways that you can integrate is by having management review meetings more frequently than annually. You can integrate management review meetings for the environmental processes with other business processes or programs. You can integrate the environmental goals with other business goals. Example, like if you have a triple bottom line goal, which are like people, profit, and planet. Let's see here. You can integrate the goals into your procurement process. For example, if you have an energy goal, do you also have a procurement process that only allows the purchasing of energy efficient goods? You can integrate into the business processes by the frequency and type of communication to the employees regarding the processes of the environmental goals and the environmental issues. You can do employee reward and recognition programs for success related to environmental goals. You can develop departmental goals related to environmental issues and cross-functional management meetings on the floor, like Gemba walks. So those are some examples of ways in which you can integrate into the core business processes. So that is it for the standard for planning. Do we have any questions from anything that we went over today?
I do see a hand raised.
Yep.
Hey.
Just a quick question about looping in employees.
Mhm.
What are some, have you found any effective tools for, I guess, driving engagement, getting people excited about an EMS, or if failing to get people excited, at least getting them engaged enough to pay attention and care?
Yes, absolutely. And that is definitely something that's important. So and Marcia and Dawn, please feel free to jump in at any time here as well. But we've seen all sorts of things. You can have like EMS kickoff parties, you know, give people pizza and they're always happy. But also, I mean, that's just for like, if you're just getting started. We've seen,
There put some
sorry.
incentive programs like gift cards even, or
Mhm.
and one of the things that I think touches people to the core, if you're working, say, on the floor, manufacturing process, and sorry everyone, I forgot to cut my camera on my presentation, so you didn't see all my hand waving, but is getting them to understand their impact day in, day out, you know, on what impact do they have in this process, and implications to their EMS, and that's good or bad. And so it really gets them involved and motivated and lets them know yeah, I do serve a purpose in that EMS, and that's exciting to see. But as Davey meant, yeah, the parties, get-togethers, incentive programs, whether it's bonus points that lead up to some kind of prize, gift cards, etc., something of that nature, family days that wrap their arms around the EMS and educates people that way, especially on the environmental policy.
Yep, I was going to say suggestion boxes or
Mhm.
some other way for feedback. And especially if someone suggests something, but for some reason you can't implement, that you definitely follow up with that person and say, we investigated this, we appreciate that you are, trying to continually improve our system. One of our members made it mandatory where their employees had to provide a suggestion. I forgot what the frequency was, but that was an expectation, and the employee knew that.
Yeah.
And then it's also putting it in their job descriptions or their KPIs or whatever the heck how you measure success for your employees. Letting them know that that is an expectation of them, that if they see a way for us to improve, to share that with everyone.
Yeah.
Another way is for quite a few members have green teams.
Mhm.
And they may not just be focused on the EMS, it may be some, funner things. You have a community garden, or, you ask employees for input on beautifying a part of your site. When they get some ownership into things, and maybe, they do a particular job at your site, but they're really interested in something else. Like some of our stewards have beehives, and people get to volunteer and take care of the bees. So there is no special sauce, and it may take some trial and error at your facility to find out what really works. But we've had some other members have success with getting folks.
And to touch base on what Marcia mentioned, like suggestions and input that way, you can actually make the review, reviewing the EMS as part of their training, onboard training, every year, annual training. That's another set of eyes to review this EMS, because over the course of that past year, they may realize, hey, we can really bump this up from what I've seen and what I've experienced, gets hands-on. So again, they're not editing or revising, but they're able to give suggestions on, and it gives you an extra person, a group of people to review this EMS for you. And you can take all that to heart and see where it fits in.
I think another thing we've seen is dedicated space to showing what the environmental goals are and what the progress to those goals are. So one of our facilities has an eco room or an eco zone where they have all of their posters of what the goals are and what their progress is. They also have their EMS certification up in that area. But we've seen that at lots of different facilities, and the more that the employees see the stuff that's happening in the EMS, the more likely they are to be engaged and remember that oh yeah, we do have an EMS and it is important.
Yeah,
And
and
even, can I jump in and add something too? Just real quick. Even saying, I think it's the same site that David was mentioning that has the eco room. If I remember correctly, they have their suggestion box is incentivized somehow, or maybe that's the one that's required, Don was mentioning, but you could totally incentivize a suggestion box, turn it into a raffle. Say, hey, if you put in a suggestion and we pull your name, you'll get a gift card or something like that,
definitely. And I was just going to add, Michael, the facility that you're at, I believe they had a special area where they highlighted near the cafeteria all of their environmental programs. And then we will tout EPA RTP because they did a great thing where they created a video, and upper management talked about why it's important to support the EMS and why leadership supports the EMS, and why it's important for everyone at the site to do their part and to offer suggestions. So that's another way to get
It's funny
people.
that you mentioned the cafe posters.
Yeah.
We actually just updated those.
There we
That
go.
was a fairly. I'm on. I guess spoiler alert. I'm on the EMS team there, and so I'm in here to try and be better at that. So yeah, that's just funny. That's it's funny that other people know about those posters.
Yeah, well, because EPA's RTP campus does not pay a third-party auditor, so we come in and do that functionally equivalent. So functionally equivalent, where we deem your system to be the same as if an outside auditor came and said that yes, you were meeting the standard. So we've been there quite a few times. We are probably, if you're going to be there, what is it? When are we going next week, guys? Next Tuesday? Next Wednesday?
The 29th?
Wednesday.
Yeah, I believe it's Wednesday. Yes.
Wednesday, yeah. So our Caitlin has graciously agreed to come in. She's going to be interviewed for our program video that we're doing, but we're also bringing the interns along so they can see all the great things that you guys do, your pollinator garden, all of your solar panels that you guys use. I think that you're now reusing your cooling water, I believe. I think that all went through its thing. So
It did. That was a fairly major project. I want to say like last year before I got there. But yeah, I remember that's one of the talking points. We actually, I believe, highlight that in our EMS training now as something we've done to improve our water efficiency.
yeah, and I think Caitlin talked about at our conference last year, we had a couple folks talk about green lab programs. So all of our pharmaceutical folks, EPA, NIHS, we have a new member, RTI. We're all talking about the subject being green labs. And I know one of the things maybe you can show us when we're there, I think you were working on adjusting the airflows and all of the hoods so that you're not pushing as much air out. You don't have to condition as much air that has to go through those labs, and you're automating it so that if somebody left, there was a vacancy sensor that would automatically trigger for that to get adjusted. So you guys are doing some great stuff there.
Thank you. It is really cool to see all the initiatives happening.
Excellent. Well, excellent question. Do we have any other questions?
Doesn't look like it, guys, from what I'm seeing.
Okay, I'm not seeing any either. So we will reconvene on June 28th, which is next Tuesday, at 1 o'clock, just like today. And you can use the same link to get back here, but you will also get sent an email notifying you that there is an upcoming training. And if you have any questions in the meantime, just feel free to shoot us an email and we can address them at the beginning of next class. Okay, good. We don't have another question.
No, I think there was
Just in case.
Don's
Okay.
message that I saw came up live. All right, thank you all.
Excellent. Thank you, guys.